Republican strategist and former senior official at the Department of Homeland Security joins me now from Washington via Skype. Good morning to you. I don't know how much you heard of Dominic Waghorn's analysis there, our diplomatic editor, but certainly suggesting that Iran's proclamation that they will not yield to pressure regarding this missile test really is ramping up the situation and the relationship between the US and Iran.
Well, I think that, in a lot of cases, presidents are tested in the early days of their administration. I think this is an obvious test for President Trump in the first 2 or 3 weeks of his administration. And, countries such as Iran, North Korea, others that have had an adversarial relationship with the United States will look to test our new presidents. And I think that, Donald Trump and his secretary, his national security advisor yesterday, General Flynn, quickly came out and addressed the issue of the missile tests. And so I think that you're seeing a early hardline stance from the Trump administration on issues such as missile tests. And, President Trump has signaled that he's not necessarily looking to rip up the deal that the Obama administration signed, but he's looking to hold everyone's feet to the fire to kind of enforce the agreement. So I think that's what we're seeing here in the early days.
Not very conciliatory in the least, saying that they're officially putting Iran on notice and saying that that deal was actually referring to it as a rubbish deal. I mean, that's not the best starting point, is it?
Well, I think that certainly there's different styles. This is a different approach and a different style for this administration than maybe what, President Obama had done. I think, you could probably say that President George W. Bush also had a different style when he was dealing with world leaders. And so, I think the administration is, working its way through some of the discussions, the discussion with the Australian Prime Minister yesterday. We've been exposed to probably more information that we're normally used to in terms of conversations between world leaders. But, at the same time, the Syrian refugee policy wasn't very popular here in the United States. And so I think that, President Trump is expressing that to other world leaders about the unpopularity of that, process here. And then, whatever vetting or plans are put in place down the road, they'll have to figure out.
What would you say to those who believe that perhaps the president's motives are more to undermine what President Obama had achieved rather than moving forward and actually progressing? He's intent on destroying what's gone before for the sake of it.
I think it's a natural transition between administrations. The Iraq War was fairly unpopular at the end of President Bush's term, and it was one of the key tenets of President Obama's campaign was to withdraw the United States from Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think, you could see a similar approach here with President Trump and policies in place with President Obama. And, he's going to want to take his own look and figure out, what is the best in terms of his administration, in terms of what he campaigned on, in terms of what, the American people are looking to have happen here. Immigration has been an issue here since 1986. We haven't really had any type of plan or policy for that. It's kind of been a little bit of cobbled together every administration. So I think that's early struggles of that policy. And I think that, you'll see other things. Healthcare is obviously a big issue here in the U.S. and trying to tweak Obamacare or replace Obamacare. And so I think we're just seeing a typical transition happening here in the U.S.
Will we see any continuation of previous policies under the Obama administration, for particularly looking militarily troops in Europe? Will we see that continued, rolled out even further?
Well, I think that President Trump already meeting with Prime Minister May and then looking to plan a trip over there sometime in the next couple of months. I think NATO and strengthening NATO is certainly on the table, and it's something that President Trump wants to do. General Mattis has flown over to South Korea and Japan for meetings in the last couple of days. And so I think that, there were deployments by the Obama administration towards the end of their term where they had put special types of aircraft, surveillance aircraft they had sent to Japan. So I think you'll see a continuation of those types of deployments and might even potentially be a double down. So I think, you will see some of these military policies when it comes to deploying some assets around the world potentially continue.
We can't argue with the views of the military personnel who are doing these jobs day in and day out. And regarding this first military raid in Yemen, US military officials are saying that it was approved by President without sufficient intelligence or ground support. And we know the consequences of that. A US Navy SEAL lost his life.
Yeah, certainly it's tragic anytime any serviceman, man or woman, loses their life. It's very difficult. It's one of the biggest challenges for a commander in chief is to send young men and women in harm's way and potentially make the ultimate sacrifice. I think we saw President Trump heading off to Dover Air Force Base.
What about the accusation that it was done without sufficient intelligence? That's fairly serious.
Well, I think it's always a best guess when it comes to intelligence in foreign countries and sending troops in. I think, you get as much information as you can. You have to make a decision whether or not to go in or not. So it's never going to be 100%. It's never going to be 75% sometimes. And you have to take the recommendations of your military commanders and trust that they're telling you the best information and go forward with that. And I think that's what he did.
Okay. Thank you very much for speaking to us. James Norton, Republican strategist.
Thank you.